Smoke billowed from a cell phone shop in Sidon, Lebanon on Wednesday after handheld radios used by Hezbollah detonated across the country's south. Lebanon's health ministry said several people were killed in the latest attack and hundreds were wounded. The death toll from Tuesday's pager explosions rose to 12, including 2 children, with nearly 3,000 injured. At a funeral for 4 of those killed by the exploding pagers, Hezbollah official Heshem Saifuddin promised a response.
This aggression inevitably has its own punishment. It has its own retribution. This punishment will come, God willing. We will not talk much, as tomorrow the talk will be for the master of the resistance.
Hezbollah said on Wednesday it had attacked Israeli artillery positions with rockets in its first strike at its arch foe since the pager blasts. A senior Lebanese security source said the explosives were planted months earlier by Israel's spy agency, Mossad. Israel's military has declined to comment on the blasts.
It's imperative that all parties refrain from any actions that could escalate the conflict.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, in Cairo to advance efforts to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, said the detonations in Lebanon threatened to derail diplomatic efforts in the Middle East. Later, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the incidents risked a dramatic escalation in the region.
Because obviously, the logic of making all these devices explode is to do it as a preemptive strike before a major military operation.
A security source said the handheld radios were purchased by Hezbollah 5 months ago, around the same time the group bought the pagers. 2 sources familiar with the group's operations told Reuters its fighters began using pagers, hoping to evade Israeli tracking. A Reuters reporter in the southern suburbs of Beirut said he saw Hezbollah members frantically taking out the batteries of any walkie-talkies on them that had not exploded. Meanwhile, Israel released video on Wednesday that showed Defense Minister Yoav Gallant telling troops that more forces were being sent to the northern border, where Lebanon borders Israel, as the war moved into a new phase.
A Ukrainian drone strike destroyed a Russian weapons warehouse in the Tver region, a source in Ukraine's SBU state security service told Reuters on Wednesday. This unverified footage shows a huge ball of flames blasting into the sky and multiple detonations. The source said the warehouse in the town of Toropets contained weapons intended for tactical missile systems, as well as guided aerial bombs and artillery ammunition, and that a fire from the blast took hold of a nearly 4-mile-wide area. The Ukraine SBU source said it was part of reducing the enemy's missile potential, which it uses to destroy Ukrainian cities. War bloggers and media reported earlier on Wednesday the attack, over 200 miles west of Moscow, was near the site of a large Russian arsenal. NASA satellites picked up intense heat sources emanating from an area of about 5 square miles at the site in the early hours, and earthquake monitoring stations picked up what sensors thought was a small earthquake in the area. Explosions could be heard in the distance as Tver's governor Igor Rudynya addressed local media. He made no mention of the weapons warehouse and said Russia's air defense system successfully shot down unmanned aerial vehicles overnight, with falling debris causing the fire to start. He added that evacuations of residents in the area were underway. Rudynya later said the fire had been put out and residents could return with no recorded fatalities. Russian state media have in the past reported that a major arsenal for conventional weapons was located at the site of the blasts. State media, which is now subject to military censorship laws, was muted in its reporting on Wednesday. Both sides deny attacking civilians in the war fought since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022.
Sudan's warring parties have said they are open to peaceful solutions to end their more than 17-month-old conflict. They said that in response to US President Joe Biden's call for re-engagement in talks. Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces had shared power after staging a coup. But in April last year, competition between the two erupted into open warfare. More than 12,000 people have been killed. On Wednesday, Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan said the Sudanese government remains open to all constructive efforts aimed at ending the war. Early on Thursday, RSF leader Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo followed suit. He said the RSF confirmed its commitment to ceasefire negotiations and said it believes the path to peace is through dialogue. Both men traded blame, however, for failing to end the conflict. They have not outlined specific steps towards peace.
To allow humanitarian assistance to get to people who need it.
On Wednesday, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said progress in relation to the conflict was being hampered by an assault by the RSF on the North Darfur city of Al Fasher,
Already resulting in the deaths and displacement of thousands of vulnerable people.
He also said Sudan's army needs to halt indiscriminate bombing. The violence has created what Blinken described as the world's worst humanitarian crisis and has wrecked Sudan's economy and infrastructure. A UN fact-finding mission said earlier this month that both sides have committed abuses that may amount to war crimes.
Investigators say they know the cause of an engine failure on a Cathay Pacific flight. They blamed a damaged fuel hose which also showed signs of a fire. The probe was conducted by Hong Kong's Air Accident Investigation Authority, which released its results on Thursday. It began investigating after a passenger flight on an Airbus A350 jet received an engine fire warning shortly after takeoff on September 2nd. Investigators found a ruptured fuel hose in one of the plane's engines and 5 more secondary fuel hoses showing signs of wear and tear. The report said this, coupled with other factors like the presence of oxygen and a heat source, could lead to a fire that spread. It warned that if not found promptly and fixed, that could lead to further failures and potentially cause extensive damage to the aircraft. Cathay Pacific began inspecting all its Airbus A350 jets after the incident. The airline said it was the first component of its type to suffer such a failure on any A350 aircraft worldwide.
Japanese radio equipment maker ICOM said Thursday that it was looking into reports that two-way radio devices bearing its logo have exploded in Lebanon. Handheld radios used by armed group Hezbollah detonated on Wednesday across Lebanon's south, just one day after similar explosions of the group's pages. Lebanon's health ministry said 20 people were killed and 450 injured on Wednesday in Beirut's suburbs and the Bekaa Valley. The death toll from Tuesday's explosions rose to 12, with nearly 3,000 injured. Reuters was able to obtain a model of the handheld radio, said to have been used in Wednesday's attack, known as the ICV-8-2. In this video of Reuters' disassembly of the device, ICOM branding and Made in Japan labels are clearly visible. ICOM said it was not possible to confirm whether the radio product, reportedly related to the explosions, was shipped by the company. Sales of the device were reportedly discontinued about 10 years ago. ICOM said the batteries required to operate the device had also been discontinued. The company added that its products exported overseas undergo strict regulatory processes set by the Japanese government. ICOM has previously warned about counterfeit versions of its devices circulating in the market, especially discontinued models.
Beirut eye surgeon Elias Girardet weeps as he works around the clock treating victims of the pager explosions around Lebanon. To be in the same situation again, the doctor says. It was the same scene 4 years ago, he says, referring to the deadly Beirut port blast in 2020. He tells Reuters, quote, "We hope that this will be the end. I was seeing a part of Lebanon in every patient. Every patient I was trying to restore something from Lebanon." The explosions like this one in a grocery store in Beirut have left nearly 3,000 injured. On Wednesday, Lebanon's health minister said the death toll from the blasts rose to 12, including 2 children. Doctors performed 400 surgeries on Tuesday alone. Girardet, who is also a member of Lebanon's parliament, says, quote, My colleagues and I were in full emergency mode. We were all in the operating room without hesitation. We treated one patient after another, not just focusing on eye injuries, but everything: eyes, faces, hands, and anything we could do. While the medical system is facing many challenges like the rest of Lebanon, he says it is overcoming them and doing well. Though he adds, quote, "The fear is for what's coming. What's coming is big." His work could continue at a brisk pace as more explosions occurred around the country on Wednesday.
Stocks closed down in choppy trading on Wednesday after the Federal Reserve cut interest rates by a relatively hefty half percentage point. The Dow, S&P 500, and NASDAQ each lost between 1/4 and 1/3%. The Fed's announcement initially sent the indexes climbing, with the S&P and Dow hitting intraday highs.
Bravo, Jay Powell. Bravo.
Eric Ditton, president and managing director of the Wealth Alliance, cheered the Fed's decision, but believes the central bank should have acted sooner.
I've been really a champion of Jay Powell. I've been saying the Fed's medicine's working. I've seen inflation come down, but I really wanted him to cut last month, and he didn't. And so I would have been upset and disappointed if he came in at 25 bips. He came in at 50, 100%. That is the right move, and we're just beginning.
Markets are now fully pricing in a cut of at least 25 basis points at the Fed's November meeting, with a roughly 35% chance for another 50 basis point cut. Small cap stocks, seen as more likely to benefit from a lower interest rate environment, moved higher, with the Russell 2000 index outperforming the S&P 500. Regional banks, some of which had been stressed by higher interest rates, also gained ground, with the KBW Regional Bank Index jumping as much as 3.5% before closing up about 0.5%. Other notable movers included shares of Intuitive Machines, which surged more than 38% after the company clinched a $4.8 billion navigation services contract from NASA.
Global stocks got a lift Thursday, a day after the US Federal Reserve cut rates by 0.5 percentage point and signalled there was more to come. Japan's Nikkei index jumped around 2.5% in morning trade, while Australian stocks hit record levels. That followed all-time highs for the S&P 500 index in US trade. Investors were cheered by the outlook from Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who said the US economy was on track.
This decision reflects our growing confidence that with an appropriate recalibration of our policy stance, strength in the labor market can be maintained in a context of moderate growth and inflation moving sustainably down to 2%.
The Fed's move is expected to support spending and the US economy in general, offering hope for Asian exporters. Japan's big names were also boosted by declines for the yen against the dollar following the rate cut. Toyota and Hitachi were both up over 5% in morning trade. With the Fed's big call out of the way, Institute of Global Finance Director Fariborz Moshirian says investor focus now switches to the US election.
Who will be the president, if you like, in 2025 onwards, because their policies, depending on who is going to be their president, will directly influence actually the value of US dollars, inflation in US basically, and hence interest rate. So that's a space that we really need to wait and see.
Not every sector joined the party on Thursday, however. Asia's big chip makers tumbled after a downbeat outlook for the sector from Morgan Stanley. In South Korea, SK Hynix plunged around 8% and Samsung was down close to 3%. That drove the country's benchmark Kospi index lower in morning trade.
The Federal Reserve cut interest rates by a larger than usual 0.5 percentage point on Wednesday. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said it was aimed at boosting a cooling job market while continuing to push down on inflation.
This decision reflects our growing confidence that with an appropriate recalibration of our policy stance, strength in the labor market can be maintained in a context of moderate growth and inflation moving sustainably down to 2%.
But what will the first rate cut in 4.5 years mean for everyday consumers? The central bank said it doesn't see the policy rate returning to the sub 2% levels that prevailed for more than a decade before 2022. That means that era's low mortgage rates, often under 4%, aren't coming back anytime soon. But the rate cut could start to ease some financial pressures. A lower policy rate should translate to cheaper borrowing costs for most kinds of loans, while on average, paychecks are now rising faster than prices, as inflation has cooled substantially. Even so, each trip to the grocery store is a reminder that today's dollars don't go as far as they did just a few years ago. While the rate cut comes as hiring and wage growth have slowed, Powell says he thinks the economy remains on solid footing.
I don't see anything in the economy right now that suggests that the likelihood of a downturn is elevated. Okay, I don't see that. You see growth at a solid rate, you see inflation coming down, and you see a labor market that's still at very solid levels.
Policymakers see the Fed's benchmark interest rate falling by another 0.5 percentage point by the end of this year, and another full percentage point in 2025, which would bring them down to 3.25 to 3.5%. The next Fed policy meeting takes place in November.
Tupperware, whose iconic plastic food containers once filled millions of American kitchens, has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The move comes after several years of falling sales and failed turnaround efforts, as demand slipped due to rivals making cheaper and more environmentally friendly containers. The company said it will now chart out a sale process for the business. By doing so, it has likely sealed the fate of the so-called Tupperware lady, the nickname given to a generation of post-war housewives seeking empowerment who sold the plastic products at in-home gatherings known as Tupperware parties. The company enjoyed a brief resurgence during the pandemic as more Americans cooked at home amid travel curbs. But after some wild swings during the meme stock rallies of that period, shares of Tupperware ultimately slumped in 2023 as it delayed annual reports and breached its credit obligations.
Waymo is talking to Hyundai Motor about making its self-driving taxis. That's according to reports by South Korea's Electronic Times newspaper. It says the pair have met several times to discuss using Hyundai's Ioniq 5 vehicles for Waymo's next-generation cabs. The report says they would replace vehicles from Chinese maker Zeekr, which the Alphabet unit is currently testing. It all comes as the Biden administration locks in steep tariffs on Chinese imports, including a 100% levy on electric cars made there. A Waymo spokesperson would only say that it was hard at work on its 6th-generation vehicles, based on the Zeekr platform. Hyundai said nothing was determined at this stage. Media reports say the South Korean giant's own self-driving unit has delayed plans to launch a robo-taxi service using the Ioniq 5. Besides the tests with Zeekr, Waymo has bought vehicles from brands including Jaguar Land Rover to offer autonomous taxi services in Phoenix, San Francisco and Los Angeles. Alphabet said in July that it planned to invest $5 billion in the firm over several years, with a view to expanding ride-hailing service to new areas. Nintendo and the Pokémon Company are suing the makers of the hit Palworld video game. The pair said Thursday that they are taking Tokyo-based game developer Pocket Pair to court over alleged patent infringements. They're seeking an injunction and compensation for damages. Sometimes called Pokémon with Guns, Palworld is one of this year's breakout hit games. It gained over 25 million players within a month of being launched in mid-January. In the game, players capture and train cute creatures called pals, who can, like the player, use guns. After it was launched, the Pokémon Company said it would investigate and take action over any intellectual property violation. Pocket Pair did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Thursday's news. In July, it announced the creation of a joint venture with Sony to promote the game worldwide. Palworld is available on platforms including Steam and Microsoft's Xbox.
It is a 100% electric vehicle made in Chile with heavy-duty features, which means it is developed and designed to work in extreme conditions. It has a capacity for 24 passengers, an ABS braking system, and a range of 200 kilometers.